Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. My name is Ryan Honeyman, and I'm a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Dr. Zoe Spencer. Zoe is a Black mother, grandmother, lover, professor, and sister soldier from Berry Farm Projects in Washington, D.C., who has dedicated her life to fighting in the struggle for oppressed people. Zoe, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Great. Well, I guess first question I want to ask is, how are you doing right now on a soul level?
Man, you're always tempted to say you're doing great and you're doing good. And I really think at the soul level I am. But when you're operating on that higher frequency, a lot of times it gets to be burdensome, right? So you have to always it's crazy that you even asked me that. It's like you always have to keep your hand on your own pulse. And so you just threw me completely off by asking me that question. I think I'm good because life is purposeful. I do know that this current state and everything that's going on in the world, it kind of has me a little heavy. But because I have a purpose, I think on the soul level, I'm good. But I certainly get tired on the physical level, for real. How about you?
I try to ask that on the soul level, because if I just ask, how are you doing? People are like, I'm doing good, like fine. And then it just moves on. But it's like, I really want to know, like, how are you doing? And I think for me, I'm also in that balance of, I've been excited. We'll get into this probably, but Zoe and I have been talking about the future vision, like what this future could look like. And I think I'm excited about that in a way that I haven't been just living in the moment. I mean, it's like living in the moment is great and is amazing and is like a grind. And I think there's not enough time on like, what is the future we're actually looking for? So I would say that I'm actually doing better than I was thinking about that. Like what
makes sense. Yeah, that was purposeful. Like that was really purposeful. I'm excited to talk to you about that today because that was purposeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe for folks who don't know, can you give us a little bit about your background and how you first got interested in the work you're doing today?
Yes. So like my two-liner intro, I am a Black woman from a working class, poor, then middle class family. My mom, pretty much held the weight on her shoulders for raising us. I went from Berry Farms Projects in Southeast DC to Prince George's County, which is like this whole thing. In the words of the Jeffersons, we were moving on up. And so for me, growing up in Berry Farms, which was very different then or somewhat different then than it evolved to be. And now Berry Farms is no more. But watching my mom struggle and, being in a family where things weren't handed to us, you are forced to view life, even at a young age, in a different way. I had a somewhat traumatic upbringing, which is also good because the trauma prepares you to be who you are. So I bonded with my creator early on. I moved to a white neighborhood where I was called nigger as soon as I landed. And so that introduced me to race relations in America early on. Graduated, went to Howard, had my son as a junior in the 80s in the height of the crack epidemic and seeing what devastation that caused, and then the war on drugs, and then being a single mom myself and trying to raise my son in a positive and powerful way. And then going back to Howard, going back into my community, and now being a professor at an HBCU, a Black woman in the struggle, you have to be. And when you're attached to your divine purpose, whatever that is for you and for everyone who's listening, is really, really important because it forces your obedience and it makes you move into zones where you're not comfortable and you learn how to fight. And so, yeah, that's me.
What are you most excited about right now? What's giving you juice to wake up and do what you do every day?
My granddaughters. Yeah, my granddaughters give me fire. And wanting to create a better space for them to exist in My students absolutely give me life. I shouldn't say this publicly because I don't want my president to hear it, but I would do my job for free if I had to. But my students absolutely give me life because I view them as being extensions of myself. And then doing this work with you guys, that gives me hope. That's real talk. It's like I never thought I would be in the position to be amongst white men who are committed to this work in the ways that you all are. So that also gives me great hope. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe for folks who don't know, so I'm part of a group with 50 or 100 other white men called White Men for Racial Justice. And it's like dismantling racism within ourselves and ideally moving that out into the broader country. And Zoe's been a guest. We're going to go visit her in Virginia. And so it's been a powerful, I guess, year and a half since the group was formed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to be a part of it too.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is about one of the debates going on right now is around critical race theory. That's sort of like one of the hot topics. And can you give folks who maybe don't know what it is, just like what is it and like why is this a big thing, and just set the stage for us a little bit?
Well, let me go back to, because I'm a sociologist for your listeners, so they won't be like, oh, he had somebody talking some Black rhetoric. And so I'm going to give you my sociological analysis of why I think it's a big thing. And then I'm going to talk about what it is and therefore what it is not. I would argue, and I strongly believe, and I understand that this last year after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor created a movement and a response to racial justice, the dichotomy that exists, the Black-white racial dichotomy that has existed for centuries in this country. And I think the spark of the movement for Black lives and the nation's response to it, coupled with the work of Senator Abrams in Georgia on the presidential campaign and voting, and the tightness of the elections disrupted people's level of comfort with historic racial power dynamics. And it's crazy because in the midst of COVID, even when no one was on the field or no one was on the basketball court, you couldn't even watch sports without seeing Black Lives Matter, racial justice. It's paved in the streets of DC, and it awakened this conversation that was designed to disrupt the historic narrative of race in America. And for those people who weren't ready for that, I think that it posed an extremely deep and uncomfortable level of what psychologists would call cognitive dissonance. And what happens with that, where you have a loss of power, your quest to regain that power and the anxiety around trying to regain that power upon which people believe their privilege is based on gets to be really drastic. And so, as a Black mother, I just did an interview the other day where I talked about it. I understand white mothers' fear about quote unquote critical race theory and what that means to their children, and them trying to protect their children from their perceptions of discomfort that they believe their children will experience, because Black children have been experiencing that same level of discomfort for centuries. So what we see now has nothing to do with critical race theory and everything to do with fighting against, even with the Confederate statues coming down. I'm in Virginia, and so it's, across the state, there's a discomfort with people feeling like they're losing their own history, their own culture. And this critical race theory has been the cover for that discomfort. What critical race theory is, and if anyone is talking about critical race theory and they don't know Ryan Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Gene Stefanik, who are the kind of founders and developers of the theory, then you don't know critical race theory. What critical race theory is, one, it's not anything that's being taught in any school. I'm a sociology professor and I teach sociological theory. And I don't focus, even at an institute of higher education, I don't focus on critical race theory. It is a theoretical concept that people use in research as a point of analysis. And how it was developed is it was developed by some lawyers who were interested in really understanding why there was a disproportionate racial contact with the criminal justice system through criminal justice processing and law. And what the theory analyzed was that there was a history of embedding the ideology of white supremacy in systems and institutions. And because those ideologies were embedded, the practices of those systems and the people who run those systems produce disparate minority contact with the criminal justice system. And if I could take one more second, because I'm talking too long, let me give an example of what that looks like. So at one point, we all know slavery, enslavement was an institution and it was legal. And why was enslavement legal? Because there was an ideology that Africans and people of African descent were inferior and thus not privy to the rights and protections of the Constitution and of America, period. You can take that to Jim Crow. You can take that where it was legal to lynch or murder a Black person, and the only thing or only person you would owe would be the slave owner. It was legal to have segregated spaces. It was illegal for Black people and white people to marry. It was illegal for white people to teach an enslaved person how to read. It was illegal for Black people to congregate. And all of those things were based on the ideology of racial inferiority, right? And so what critical race theory looks at is how these ideologies are embedded in our systems and how, as they're embedded in those systems, it manifests itself in our social interactions with our institutions and with each other. And so it is a fallacy for people to be talking about critical race theory and banning critical race theory, because critical race theory isn't even being taught in PK through 12. So I'll stop.
No, you should keep going. I mean, this is and so bring us up to like today, like what is the conflict that some of the school board meetings and stuff like that, like what's been going on with that?
Well, when you think about the public school system is based on the curriculum is based on a Eurocentric ideology. What people have been led to believe through propaganda is that teachers are now going to be in school telling white children that your grandfather was a slave owner and that you're bad because your grandfather was a slave owner. The reality of it is that that is not critical race theory, and that is not the intention of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work in the school. What the schools are really trying to do is they're trying to reinvent the curriculum to be more inclusive of other cultural and historic experiences. For example, the experiences of the indigenous people and the truth about the indigenous people, the experiences of African American people, the experiences of Asian people, et cetera. And so the schools are trying to move toward a more inclusive curriculum. And the problem that I have with it, and I feel sad for white mothers who don't believe that their children are brave enough and strong enough to be able to manage learning about other cultures and still be centered. I think that they hide behind their children because they're scared. And then what happens is that they don't give their children the opportunity to evolve and to actualize in a holistic cultural way. So yeah.
Yeah. And the episode before having you on, I had this woman, Dr. Jennifer Harvey, who wrote a book called Raising White Kids, which is all about raising anti-racist white children. And I think it's sort of like the critical race theory is not being taught. And at the same time, I think white people need to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Like our kids are actually have more capacity than we think to handle some of this. And by not talking about it, it's not like they don't recognize it. You know, I think babies like 4 months or 6 months can already start to recognize different groups. And by age 4, kids are noticing if there's like what color kids are around them. So like kids are understanding the stuff. It's just we're uncomfortable with talking about it because we're afraid. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't give our children enough credit. And I don't even think it's really about the children, but we don't give our children the opportunity to be able to experience what they need to experience and learn what they need to learn to be whole within themselves and actualize within themselves in a diverse world and a diverse society.
So it almost seems like white people just don't want to feel guilty. They just want to pretend like everything's gravy. When I say they, we, as a white man. And I think we're going to have to get over that. Like, I mean, that's just step one. Let's just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And yeah, like listening to some of those school board meetings, people are saying like, I don't want my kids to learn about, what my father or like grandfather, and they're not responsible for this. It's like, we're not saying they're responsible. We're saying that they benefit from it, which is different.
Absolutely. And imagine though, in a Eurocentric curriculum, Black children, we're not talking about in the curriculum about the pre-colonial and pre-imperial Africa and the kings and queens and philosophers and scholars and religious figures and scientists and physicians and mathematicians and everything that existed in Africa pre-European penetration. We don't talk about that. So even in school, imagine what Black children have to go through to always be taught that they come from slaves and not even understand the power of the institution of enslavement and what that means to the world. So, everybody gets uncomfortable when their privilege and their power are challenged. And I get it. Like, I really get it. I'm not even mad about it. I'm mad in a way, because it threatens my existence. But I get what they feel, because what they feel is what Black mothers have been feeling for centuries, right? But we've had to endure having our children to go into spaces where they're taught nothing about themselves and everything about people who don't look like them. And us having to deal with the psychological, social, academic, and intellectual repercussions from that.
This may be a good segue to talk about the future vision a little bit, because I feel like some of those white folks, me included, it's often seen as like this impending, like equality for others is equated as less for those of us who have had power. I'm not sure if it was you were talking, if you think of it as a pie, and it's like, okay, the pie is increasing for others, then it's decreasing, but maybe reframing it as a garden, as like, what are we all growing together? Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, we had some early discussions, but one of the things that Zoe and I were talking about was, what does this future vision look like of a world where we can have our needs met, and things like we don't have prisons because, there's people have mental health care that they need, and there's not a need for large government entities with large sort of militaries because we can self-govern. What comes up for you? And like, do you have any thoughts on like that, creating that future vision? Like, what needs to happen to get us there?
Yeah. So Ryan and I had homework, like we both had to exchange homework. And I think on mine, I think the top, I don't remember, but I don't know if I wrote it concretely, but it was about creating this ideological shift, right? And before you can move to anything else, I think our common goal is like just liberating people. And the problem is that people believe that their power and privileges is predicated on somebody else's oppression. And so if you believe that your power and your privilege is only predicated on somebody else's oppression, you're not doing the other person a favor by relieving yourself of that ideology. You are actually liberating and freeing yourself when you believe that you and your family and your generations will be able to exist without any form of oppression, just on your own. Then that's powerful. And I have to say that because everything that we had on our papers, like, it was crazy how similar everything was. Yours was far more in depth than mine, but it was just crazy how similar everything was. But all of the things that we talk about are really centered on us giving up the ideology that has been promoted in order to keep us divided, be it by race, gender, class, religion, sexuality, whatever the social construct. We're on the bottom fighting each other over the crumbs that are dropped from the top, And the reality of it is that privilege is just an abstract thing. It's not even real. Like, we all have to pay the same prices at the gas station. All of us are facing higher prices for our basic necessities like food and housing. I'm watching what's happening with the housing market. And the reality of it is that all of these things are in abundance, but we've been trained and conditioned through our systems to believe that there's a scarcity and that the competition between us is the reason for the scarcity. So that's why we're fighting. So in our common themes, we talked about a more equitable distribution of resources, housing, food, especially production, and people having ownership to a degree of what they produce and not having like such a disparity. But I don't want to get into that because people might think I'm socialist and then be sending me threats on my email.
No, I mean, I think having ownership of the productive assets of the labor, I think that's really important. I was really struck by that part in yours. You talked about every worker having a relevant share of every market they perform labor in, and it's distributed equitably. Could you say more about like just how would this differ from what we think of ownership, or like how is the system set up to like how would that productive economy look like that's sort of more equitable?
So let's say, for example, and this is your area, Ryan. So I'm stepping outside of my lane, but I'm speaking from a socioeconomic perspective. So what I'm talking about is I'll use myself as an example. Teachers, and let me use professors at for-profit institutions. Professors drive the labor at a college. Teachers drive the labor at a school. And then there's a central force of labor. The warehouse workers drive the labor, and the in-store workers drive the labor of consumer spaces like Walmart and Amazon. And people still struggling to get $15 an hour. And why are they struggling to get $15 an hour? Because the people who own the companies are concerned about their profit margin. So you have people who can't eat, who are struggling to even eat and pay their bills and find housing because they're not earning enough. And the people who own the corporations are multi billionaires and trillionaires. And I'm not mad about that. I believe that, people should be able to make a profit, but I think that there should be a profit sharing in the future. The ideal future for me is a profit sharing industry where people are being compensated for the value of their labor. You have people who make couture clothes by hand, and the designer will sell it for $10,000, but the person who sold it and put it together is only getting $1.50 an hour, right? So I'm
Yes.
gonna stop there. I
Yeah.
don't know who's out there in podcast land. So
It's all good. Yeah, and I think just for folks, I can read a few of the other ones. I did have some help on mine in the co-creating, so there's been a bunch of people who've added to it, so I can't claim. But some of the other stuff's on the list that other folks have added is things like capitalism has been replaced by a regional, equitable, inclusive, communitarian, multi-stakeholder, and locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. There's leadership in all sectors of the economy, from Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Differences in outcomes of health, wealth, education, housing are not correlated with the particular belonging to a particular racial or ethnic group. Things like restorative justice is practiced widely. So I'm reading things about like, what does it look like if we're in the future for folks who are listening? There's things like full truth and reconciliation process, and reparations have been given to Black folks and folks of African descent. Indigenous wisdom is deeply respected and utilized. There's things like education. Children are not tucked away while caregivers work. No more childcare that functions to support capitalist schedule. So I think that's where folks are listening. One last thing is governance. So we talked about primary decision-making happens at the smallest scale appropriate to the arena we're trying to govern. For example, watershed governance for water issues. If the people who live in a certain watershed, or the area where, if the rain falls, that's where the water accumulates. That's like a watershed, have the ability to make the decisions for that area, not some government agency hundreds of miles away. It's funny. It almost seems like libertarian in some ways. Like small government, but it's not really about that. It's just more there's local governance as opposed to centralized governance.
Yeah.
Anything coming up for you on that?
Just yes.
Just yes.
Just yes, all of that.
Can you
Yeah.
tell folks about the law of Ma'at?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. So the law of Mayat, there are 11 laws and 42 principles of Mayat. And it's spelled, for your listeners who may want to look it up, it's spelled MA apostrophe AT. When you look it up online, the first thing that they'll give you is a goddess, Mayat, and she is the goddess of kind of life and death in essence. And in Kemetic or Egyptian tradition, she's the one who weighs your soul before you are entered into the higher afterlife or not. And concept, and I'm telling this part because it's important to understand, and the concept is that your heart has to be as light as a feather. And if your heart is heavier than a feather, then you gotta recycle and do it all again until you get yourself together. And it's powerful because in ancient African tradition, there were no governments. Government is to be governed, and it's based on the need to be governed. The concept that humans have to be governed in order to have balance in a society. But the law of Mayat, there's this one law, well, several of them in particular, but the law of Mayat is basically the law of balance, equality, and justice. She's almost like Lady Liberty, and I think that they probably created Lady Liberty in that vein or in her image. But the whole concept is that we are, and I'm just going to put it simple, is like we're our brother's keepers, right? And that we are on earth and that we have to create a sense of balance both within ourselves first and then between ourselves and the universe, no matter what that means, whether it's you and I or me and the bee or the bug or whatever. And that when we look at each other as extensions of ourselves or as gifts and beings that we did not create, then we take better care of each other. We take better care of ourselves, and then we take better care of each other. And when we're in that kind of communal type of space, like spiritually communal space, that I don't look at Ryan as a white man, and therefore from a racial and gender perspective, you are the other. I would look at Ryan like my brother. And so I'm gonna make sure you're good. You're gonna make sure I'm good. And if everybody, imagine, it's so damn idealistic, but imagine if everybody looked at each other like, if I'm good, you're good. And so that was the law of Mayat. And that if you broke that balance and you brought ill will to the space, then you would be removed from the space, however that looks. So that is the law of Mayat in essence. And there's one law in particular, I think it's the law of Herakuti, and it says that God neither rewards nor punishes. We owe that to ourselves, and that the other law is that he needs humans to bring his will into existence on earth.
I love
Yeah.
that.
I know they
Thank
probably
you.
like, oh, he got Erica Badu on here talking that
Oh
nonsense.
no. Where was La Mayat practiced? You said
It was in,
pre-colonial Africa or
it was in Kemet. It was in Egypt. Yeah,
oh
it
in
was in
Egypt.
Kemet, long before, we're talking 2400 BC, before the invasions, before the Persian and Assyrian invasions.
Got it.
Yeah.
Man, I have to learn some more history.
Yeah.
What about sort of taking it to, what we've learned over the last 18 months to today? I'm curious, what did we learn about movement infrastructure the past year, and where is it strong and where is it weak?
I think the strength and the weakness of movement historically are the same. What I learned, I think what we've all learned is, number one, social media is a powerful, powerful tool. And technology coupled with social media is a powerful, powerful tool. I think that we should have all learned and recognized the beauty and intensity of grassroots movement and mobilizing. Is that what you're asking me about?
Yeah, just over the last year with
Yeah,
racial justice and just other
yeah,
movements. Yep.
yeah. I think, yeah, definitely the grassroots mobilizing is important. The importance of having a loosely tied network of movements that all have the same agenda. is really, really important. I think that that's both a strength and a weakness, though. There's a saying, I think it may be in, well, probably I just made that up. So I'm not going to say, I don't think it's in The Art of War, but there's a saying that if you cut off the head, the body dies. And that has been traditionally the way that movements that challenge convention have been disrupted, by having just one leader and then you just get rid of the head and the body of the movement dies. And so I think not just over the past year, but really kind of over the past decade with the different ones, I think this was probably one of the most significant ones, understanding how important it is to have grassroots movement and grassroots mobilization with different heads and different leaderships with the same agenda. I think the problem as an activist, as an elder activist that, I've seen is the struggle is not about people. And, sometimes people want to kidnap the struggle and snatch the mics away from the voices of the people, and that weakens movements. But yeah, I think that we learned the power of grassroots mobilization and which is probably what made people uncomfortable, the whole notion that this is unacceptable and people not having that.
Yes,
part.
we're never going back to normal. There's no such things.
Right.
Normal wasn't normal for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Is there a firmly held belief that you used to have that has changed over the last 18 months?
Yeah, man. So before last year in particular, I have been very much rooted in my community and the struggle of my community. I'm an activist. And so even though I have and an advocate for families of state-sponsored violence, and so I've done work for Black families as well as white families who've lost their loved ones to state-sponsored violence. And before last year, I never really thought that I would be doing any work with any police departments and any white men. Yeah, that was powerful. So I broke my leg before George Floyd was strangled. And so when everything happened, I would normally be outside and I couldn't go outside. And my students, a lot of them were leading movements here in Virginia and in DC, but I couldn't go outside. So I had to find another constructive way. So I had to be still and be guided. And out of that, I started to work with the local and regional police departments. And that was very, very uncomfortable for me. And I learned that change is possible and that people that I never would think had an understanding do have an understanding. Then I started working with you guys and I'm like, okay, there's hope. I think that was the greatest disruption for me, because it totally took me out of my comfort zone and it forced me to deal with my own biases and my own limitations and my own, I'm not going to say fear because I wasn't scared, but I would never have thought that we, would be having our conversations. And I definitely never thought I would be in a room hugging police chiefs and officers.
Yeah. Can you say more about what did you see with your work with the police that sort of had some change in you? I'm just curious what you saw.
Well, the first thing that made me change, because when I decided I was going to do it and agreed to do it, I had to call them on the phone. I'm from DC. I'm from the projects in DC, and I'm in Virginia now, like the original slave state. So I'm calling these police chiefs and listening. There's this one, his name is Sheriff Adams, and we laughed about it. It was so crazy. I called him on the phone and he has this really, really heavy Southern accent. And I'm like, Z, what are you doing? Like, I was really sweating a little bit because it's like, but then they all responded and they all showed up and they all commit to the work and they're doing it. And then in having conversations, yesterday evening, we were in a town called Hopewell down here, knocking on doors with the Hopewell Police Department to address community violence. And so, just being able to see people and humanity outside of the uniforms or beyond the uniforms, beyond the skin, beyond the hair, beyond the gender, and to have these deep conversations where you understand that even when you don't agree, there's still understanding. And most often than not, there is agreement, and that people are not afraid to hear the feedback because I'm a yapper and I don't care who it is, be it in prison or in front of police chiefs. I'm gonna say what I have to say. So it liberated me because let me go back. It also liberated me from my fear too, because as a Black woman, it used to make me nervous when police would pull up behind me or are around me.
Let me just say, as a white male, I get nervous when the police pull up. So it is a universal, but obviously it's different, but I'm like, oh
I
shit.
get it. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. Wow, that's really inspiring, because I think for me, I think many of us on the maybe more activist side of the spectrum, the more like Black Lives Matter, F the police side, it's so like there may be a feeling that just doubling down and painting everyone else as the other, it feels good, like it's intoxicating, right? We're all about it, like fuck and I don't know if it's actually getting us closer in a way. But it's hard because it's way harder to talk to the other side than to just say F them,
It is excruciatingly hard, but absolutely necessary. And that some people like, what are you doing? Like, if you are revolutionary, then you're not supposed to be effing with the police. But the reality of it is that for me, we can't protest march and then wait for the next thing and protest march. While we're doing the work, we have to be able to do the uncomfortable work, right? Y'all are doing the uncomfortable work. Y'all are going to do uncomfortable work. And if we're going to change the dynamics and trajectory, we have to do the uncomfortable work of bridging the gap. We have to provide the spaces for the police to view Black and brown people and communities as human and viable communities and people. And we have to allow Black and brown people to develop out of that a sense of trust for police as well. But you can't do it while we're both the other. So the work is really centered around providing immersive experiences, most importantly, so that the police have an opportunity to engage the community and also confront their biases and limitations and the institutional and systemic racism that is in cultural shit that's embedded in their departments, and so that they can be held accountable for their actions. And my goal at the end of the day is I just don't want any drama around my students who are my babies, whose parents entrust us with them at Virginia State. I don't want any tragedies. So whatever I have to do to make sure that I have created a space for transformation or at least a modicum of reform, then I'm gonna do it. And so, yeah.
Thank you for that work. I mean, it's paying off, and I know it's excruciatingly slow sometimes, but I see it working. And I think we're all sort of like reaching a little bit, maybe even way past our comfort, but then somebody else is doing it too. And you're like, okay, this could work. There's something about the relationship building that I think is lost, where it's like, even if you meet with those police officers, at the end of the day, you disagree, there's a relationship that's starting to form, which is actually some of that social fabric that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's real.
I'm curious, who else is sort of inspiring you right now? Like, who are you watching? Who are you listening to? Who are you reading that's just giving you a lot of energy to keep it going?
I'm listening to God first and foremost. That's period. It sounds corny. And, people be like, oh, bullshit. But yeah, in this work, I'm not watching or listening really for anybody other than my creator's guidance, because that's important. I'm fallible and humans are fallible, and everybody has their purpose and they have their walk. And, how people are led is not for any of us to define or understand. But because the work that we do, but specifically myself, because I know that the work that I do is tied to my community, right? And I have to always be sure that I'm being guided righteously and that I'm being held accountable. So I am often in meditation, and being still when stuff happens and just asking my creator for guidance on what I should do. And it'd be like, sometimes I'm like, nah, God, I don't think I really want to do that. Like, really? That? Nah, I don't think is that you talking to me? No, that's not you. Do I have to do that? Like this right here, like this was not my idea. Trust me. It's been a lot of stuff that I've done right. It's not my idea. But, I've learned that when you are following your divine purpose and you're being obedient to a higher power, not only are the resources provided for you, but the message and the outcome are clear. That aside, I have read throughout my long academic and intellectual development that I hope continues. I've read everything from COINTELPRO, the FBI secret war on political freedom, to how Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, to every kind of sociological book and books on movement and how movements have been successful and how they've been dismantled. And so I kind of put myself under the arm of ancestors like Ida B. Wells and contemporary intellectuals like Bell Hooks. So, but Ida B. Wells, I think that's my spirit guide. I love her. And for those who don't know,
yeah.
Ida B. Wells, she did the anti-lynching movement. A book in particular by Ida B. Wells.
I was also just thinking, if there's a book for Ida B. Wells, but is there a book you most often give as a gift to others?
Dang, you made me feel bad. I'm about to start giving gifts. If I had to give a gift, I don't know. Well, readings, though, I give. Definitely COINTELPRO. That is a must. Definitely Sun Tzu, The Art of War. That is a must. And that's for people who are engaged in frontline organizing work. I recommend Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa to a lot of people, not necessarily in the work. And then just studying Ida B. Wells' anti-lynching movement. Yeah, I think those are the ones that I recommend the most.
And then one thing we like to ask guests towards the end is, what do you need right now? And how can the listeners help you grow this new movement or new economy?
What I would love to see people do is elevate their consciousness to be not empathetic or sympathetic, because when you're empathetic and sympathetic in particular, it's like you're still viewing people as others. And so, you're giving them your sympathy as like a favor, but to be able to actualize and develop their empathic selves. And that is the ability to truly connect with other people as extensions of yourself, no matter who they are, which requires an undoing of the deep, deep, deep indoctrination that we've all experienced as far as race is concerned, in order to justify power dynamics that legitimately only benefit the few. And I would ask, what I need people to do is to stop believing that your well-being and the well-being of your children and of your communities is predicated on oppression. You don't have to have an oppressed people. There doesn't have to be anybody beneath you in order for you to see over top of the fence. All you have to do is just stand on your tippy toes or get some heels so you can see over the fence. And so, yeah, I think if I needed anything or if I wanted to see anything, those are the things that I would want to see, because I believe those are the things that are most essentially necessary for evolution.
And where can folks learn more about your work?
Google. Yeah, probably. I mean, you can just Google Dr. Zoe Spencer, Zoe Spencer, Spencer, or Zoe Spencer, Spencer, and you will find a plethora of my work, my struggles. I am on Facebook. I'm almost at my 5,000 limit capacity. So, and I'm not on Twitter or Instagram that much. I'll probably build it. And also you can find some of my stuff on drzospencer.com.
Dope. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Zoe Spencer. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.